This is Nailing the Apex, and I'm Tim Hauraney. We just got done Chinese Grand Prix qualifying. It was awesome. We'll dive into that. We'll talk about the sprint race that happened as well. It is 4:55 a.m. I've been up since 7:30 a.m. Let's do this because we're talking Formula One, and this qualifying session that we just came out of, I think, is a perfect example of what we're going to be treated to for the rest of the season. Because that 4/10 gap that both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri pulled on Max Verstappen during qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix, I mean, it doesn't really look like that is the performance gap or the realistic performance gap between McLaren and everyone else. Because Oscar Piastri bags his first ever pole position for the Chinese Grand Prix. He said he didn't think the laps were that hooked up, and the car came to life in Q3, he had said. The lap was still a bit messy. I went back and took a quick look at the onboard, but I think when you look at the top four, even the top eight, and if you put a lap together, you can make up a load of time. Less than half a second was covering the top eight and all five separate teams as well. So whoever was able to just piece the closest lap to perfect was going to get pole. And that's basically what this one all boiled down to. If you go back to the sprint qualifying, I think Lewis Hamilton said something similar to that. It was just that he had to piece the lap together, and being able to piece the lap together allowed him to grab that sprint pole. And so I think that the same thing applied to this one as well. Actually, I know. You could just see it. But let's talk about Piastri's final push lap, because like I had mentioned, it was a little messy, and it was the final hairpin that he was down around 2/10. Coming to the end of that final push lap, and he found that 2/10 by just sending it into the hairpin. It was pretty impressive. I mean, he really flung that one in there, and somehow able to make it stick, and that's where he made up all of his time. It was quite remarkable to see that. Thought he was going to fly off the track at one point, but I mean, he kept it together, kept it on the black stuff, and away he went, grabbed pole position. Daniel Ricciardo, he was the last Australian driver to get pole position from, I believe, and you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 2018, the Mexico Grand Prix. I think that was the last time an Australian driver got pole position. Like I had said, that was Oscar Piastri's first ever pole position for the Chinese Grand Prix. It's just those little tiny things that I think Oscar, and we had talked about on the show last year, that really needed to work on to sort of take his racing to another level. It was qualifying, and also just taking care of the tire at certain segments throughout a Grand Prix distance. I think he's got that portion under control, and now I think he's starting to build on that qualifying pace and performance. Really great job from him today at the Chinese Grand Prix in qualifying. George Russell, man, that guy pulled a lap out. It was incredible. He splits the McLarens, going to roll off P2. Tried different preparations for the tires. So in Q2, if I remember correctly, did two slow out laps, which I thought was quite strange. So George was actually having a really difficult time of prepping the tire and getting it ready for activation, you would call it, for his push lap in quali. He was, he had said he was really experimenting on all of those prep laps. And then on the final push lap in Q3, he came out of the pits and just figured, whatever, I'm going to do it this way and let's see what happens. Drove around dead slow on that warm-up lap. And basically, that just helped him save as much of the tire as possible. And that was enough. That's what helped him to P2. Plus, he had a really fantastic qualifying lap as well. I think he lost a bit in turn 1, but then was able to just make that deficit up throughout his final push lap. I'd have to go back and take a closer look at it, but believe when I looked at the data and the timing and scoring, that's sort of where he lost everything but then gained. As for George Russell, he believes that the car is currently anywhere between P3 to a P7 car is where he believes they currently are. Again, I don't know, George coming into this weekend, he was saying that the McLaren was like the RB19 from 2023, just that world beater. No one was ever going to beat them, all that kind of stuff. Well, Lewis Hamilton beat them on Saturday at sprint race. And George got awfully close to taking pole position here on Saturday afternoon at the Chinese Grand Prix. And sometimes I wonder if George is just smoke and mirrors sometimes when he just talks about stuff, because I didn't believe what he had said, and I still don't, because I think McLaren is beatable. Maybe not in the race. Maybe race pace for McLaren, yes, maybe that is not that reachable just yet. However, in the sprint race, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but in the sprint race, Hamilton did a really great job of pushing through the grain and keeping the tire alive, where Piastri kind of struggled. He had to get around Max Verstappen. There wasn't really much left in the tire. So that leads me to believe that maybe McLaren's not that great at, keeping the tire alive for lengths of time when they're stuck in traffic or they're stuck behind other cars. So, yes, in some points, I think on Sunday for the race, McLaren probably will have an advantage, but that doesn't mean that someone else can roll the dice on strategy and try and eke something out, a better position. As for Lando Norris, made a mistake in his final push lap, and then he just brought it in. Norris said he had made too many mistakes from his side. He didn't feel comfortable with the car this weekend. Lando said he wasn't feeling confident because the car was tricky to drive. It's a fast car, but putting the lap together is quite challenging, and to do that consistently enough. But when you do a good job, it's the quickest car and lap when it stays consistent, if that makes any sense. Essentially, it has a narrow operating window. I kind of compare it to the Red Bull, the RB20 from last year, where when Red Bull was able to nail that operating window, they were very strong. The RB20 was a very impressive car. But when they struggled to get the car in the window, it was difficult to drive, very tricky, very peaky, easy to lose it, easy to overheat the tire. But when the car was starting to fall into the window, increased the confidence of the driver. And I think for Lando, we saw that this weekend, because there were glimpses, right? There were some glimpses in Q2 where you were like, okay, Lando's back and he's good to go. But then in the sprint race, made a really silly error. And then again for sprint quali as well. So it just you could actually really see it this weekend, and you could see it kind of just sap his confidence from time to time. So that leads me to believe that this McLaren car, however fast it is, has those weaknesses where if it's not in the right operating window, the driver can't extract the lap time from it. However, he'll roll off P3. I still think he's going to be in contention for a race victory. So what do you think about all that? Australia, they had a handy 4/10 gap in qualifying. McLaren did. Managed the tire well in the race. Obviously it was inclement weather as well. Tough to get a gauge on where they are with that tire management. A lot of the teams believe they're really good at it. They're very strong in that department. But now that gap is less. It's less than a tenth. And so what does that say? This was probably the most consistent running that teams have had since Bahrain testing. And even Bahrain testing didn't really offer up that much consistency because of how bad the weather was. It was cold in Bahrain. It just was. So is this where everybody kind of is right now? That's the question. And will it be like this moving forward? I think it will. This was a tight qualifying. It really did come down to if you made a little mistake in your qualifying lap, you were done. That was it. No matter how much of it you could salvage, unless you're Oscar Piastri and you threw it into the hairpin, second last corner at this track. But if you weren't Oscar Piastri, and you made just that tiny little error, that was it. So the rest of Q3 is Max Verstappen P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, Charles Leclerc P6, Isaac Hadjar P7, Kimi Antonelli P8, Yuki Tsunoda P9, and Alex Albon P10. Racing Bulls do look like the best of the rest, I would say. You've got your top four, and then you've got Racing Bulls, and then you've got sort of everyone else, and Williams, I think, is kind of bumping up just behind Racing Bulls. Alex Albon, again, pulling off some dynamite laps in Williams' car that can be quite tricky. We've seen what has been going on with Carlos Sainz, where tiny bit inconsistent. He'll be fast in some events and he'll be slower in others, where I think Alex Albon just knows where that sweet spot in the car is, and he kind of hides that until it's time to party in qualifying, and then he just unleashes that performance. And that's something that Carlos Sainz is going to have to figure out and learn. That's just going to take time. Out in Q2, Esteban Ocon. Nice showing from Esteban Ocon, considering what had happened the day before in sprint quali. Really not a great performance. Made a lot of mistakes, especially in the last corner. Really costed him. Just wasn't good. However, Haas really turning things around as well. Ollie Behrman had a great qualifying in sprint quali on Friday. And now Ocon with a really nice quali on Saturday, Chinese Grand Prix qualifying. Nico Hülkenberg also, Sauber, really strong stuff from him as well. P12 for Hülkenberg. Then Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, both of those two drivers at Aston Martin have been extremely close back and forth with each other ever since the beginning of the season. So, that tells you that the car is quite drivable and that they're extracting everything they can from it. The two of them are, they're hundredths of a second apart sometimes in sessions. So that will help push the team forward and get Aston Martin maybe closer to the top of the midfield sooner, but we'll wait and see. Carlos Sainz rounded that out in Q2. And then Q1, out at the end, Pierre Gasly, Ollie Behrman, Jack Doohan, Gabriel Bortoleto. Now, when we look at the Alpines, so they actually removed their rear wing from Australia and made some corrections because the test that the FIA was going to run on everyone's cars during Park Fermé this weekend, because we had that rule change from the FIA about the flexi wings. We talked about it in our last podcast. If you want to hear more about it, learn more about it, go back to that one. It is a little boring, but kind of it gives you a good explainer as to sort of how that all kind of played out and worked. But anyways, Alpine had to replace their rear wing. So they were coming into this one probably a little down on performance simply because of that. I mean, it really did look like it affected them having to make that change. And yeah, we'll see where Alpine kind of goes from there with it, because it could be challenging to try and replicate or get back that performance. But we'll see. You know, we're still in early days here, and still trying to see where everybody lands. Liam Lawson, dead last. He said it was really tough. He said the window of the car is really small. He said it's not an excuse, and he has to get a handle on it, and that the session for him was just messy. He thinks it will take time. It takes a lot of confidence, and it just seems like he's really missing where that operating window is for the car and tires. So what does he need to do from here? I mean, it's going to be extremely challenging for him to score points on Sunday. Sprint race wasn't great either. When does Red Bull start thinking about dropping him? Like, he was well off the pace. Like, not just like a little bit. Like, he was like really off the pace. Not even Sergio was that far off the pace, I don't think, at times. Like, I think Lawson was over a second or just on a second. Feel bad for him. It's going to take some time for sure. It's a difficult car to drive, and he's going to have to figure it out. I mean, does Red Bull Racing give him 5 more races, 7 more races? I mean, I think it's only fair to give him at least a race 7 or 8, maybe even a little bit longer, before you start considering replacing him with somebody else. And Yuki Tsunoda has to keep performing. If Yuki wants to be that person, he's got to be ready to go if they end up making a swap at all at any point this season. I don't think Lawson is the type of driver they were just going to drop. I think they think has a lot of potential in there. This is just a really hard car to drive, and Max is an incredible driver. You're going up against the best in the world. So I think it could take some time for them to iron some things out for Liam. I think next week, having a week off may help a lot too. And then we'll see where he is in Japan, because I don't think anything's happening for him at the Chinese Grand Prix. I mean, starting that far back, I highly doubt he scores points. I mean, he might, but I highly doubt it. Going to Japan for him might be a good thing too. He knows that track, raced on it before, knows it well. So, maybe that's something that helps him, because Australia and China are both tracks that he's never been to. Let's dig into the sprint race a little bit before we take off here, because I want to talk about Lewis Hamilton. I was at SportsCenter tonight, and we did a live hit talking about Lewis's win. And I think Hamilton took a big step forward coming from Australia. It's like I've repeatedly said, it takes time when you join a new team. Lewis actually had a meeting with Ricardo Adami during the week about some things that he wanted to try, like they were doing in Bahrain, and then felt that they didn't continue doing those things in Australia. I think they also had some issues with their simulator runs back at Ferrari, giving them wrong data, if I'm not mistaken. And came here to China and was a really impressive performance. Started this one, I think a lot of us felt like the McLarens would come through the field. Ferrari wasn't sure they could hold on to the win because of McLaren's superior tire management. And Ferrari never had a chance to do long runs in free practice one, and that is so crucial. You need to get those long runs in. They are very important. They tell you where you're at with your tire deg for race runs, or where the tires could end up in a Grand Prix with the setup that you have in the car. They're very important. They never got to do it. So the teams coming into the sprint blind on tire management. Not really too sure what to do. That's an issue. That's a big, big issue. And it's not Ferrari's fault. I mean, these sprint weekends are tough. You have someone who brings out a red flag in a free practice session, and you're losing a ton of time, ton of track time, and then you're straight into a qualifying. So not a lot of time to learn the car, engineer the car, get it in the right window. Lewis, yeah, he was impressive. Really impressive in this one. He had some front graining issue. If you go back and you look at lap 8, he's coming down to the hairpin. There's a good shot of it. It's tight shot of Hamilton coming down to turn 8. You can see the graining on the left front. And I was looking at it and I was like, wow, that's a ton of graining. And I wonder if someone else has any. And then I look up and see the split between, Hamilton and Verstappen. And the gap, was over a second. And then all of a sudden it came down. It was like 0.6. And I was like, uh-oh. That may be it for Lewis's tires. I think he's done here. I think Max is coming to get him. And somehow Max, couldn't get close enough to pull off a pass. Lewis doing a great job of defending where he needed to, using the tire where he needed to, and pushing through the graining phase on the tire. It was actually quite remarkable to see his tire management skills. It was the tire whisperer. He's back. It was great. It was great to see that. I always enjoy watching that because it is such a difficult thing to do. And then obviously Max having, tried to chase Lewis down and pull off a pass, chewed right through his tires. So you can see that Red Bull was definitely having trouble with that. But Ferrari actually wasn't too much. I mean, not as bad as everyone else. Everyone else really had massive drop-off. Like Oscar Piastri had big drop-off as well. And I think with these tires, the load on the car, fighting through traffic, being stuck behind other cars, it increases the degradation of the tire. Off the start, Lando Norris's mistake on the opening lap. There's just no reason, I think, why he was that far over on the left-hand side, and basically just drops the wheel in the dirt and off he goes and loses position. He's dropped out of the points altogether. And I think if you do the track walk, and you should know you can't be over that far out there. So just a little mistake that really costed him, big time. And you can't have that happen when you're trying to win a driver's title. Like, every point counts. And yes, he captured 1 point, but he had lost so many others because of a small error. And in a championship that's going to be this close, I don't think you can, make those types of errors and really get away with it. Like, you may pay for that later. We'll see. We'll wait and see what happens. But I mean, it's little tiny details like that you're going to have to start paying attention to in this drivers' championship battle, because it's very close. I mean, after the sprint, I mean, Max is 1 point behind Lando in the driver's standing. So, explained about the front graining, talked about the tires, talked about Lewis pushing through, talked about Hamilton's experience, but we didn't really ever talk about his teammate Charles Leclerc, who didn't look really on it either. It looked like a struggle for him. He said at the end, quote, "Historically, I've always been struggling like crazy here." So at the track in China. But that's not an excuse, obviously. You've got to learn, and for now, it doesn't seem like I'm doing the right things in the car. I mean, obviously, like, Leclerc is very hard on himself when he knows that things he should be doing better and he's not. He really gets frustrated by that, and sometimes he can be quite hard on himself. I thought his quality was decent. It did look like he rebounded a bit, and it'll be interesting to see how things go between him and Lewis from here on out. I mean, Lewis getting that win, that's big for the team, right? That's huge for this team. And Charles wasn't the one to get it. It was Lewis. So let's see how things evolve. But tough one for Leclerc, and let's see how things go for him on Sunday. Fascinating story to watch, though. Pay attention to that one. Further back in the field, we had some good drives. Thought Lance Stroll, again, had a really nice drive. Couldn't really hold on to 8th, obviously, with Lando chasing him down and getting the slipstream and the DRS and getting past. But I still thought that Lance had driven well since Australia. I mean, he's looked pretty good. Yeah, he's looked pretty good. Coming off, really good qualifying as well. Gasly went from 17th to finish 12th. Great drive from him. Liam Lawson, again, just a dreadful start to this weekend for Lawson, going from, 19th to 14th? And, his teammate finishing on the podium. It's not going to be good for his confidence. It's not going to be good for the confidence. But let's give him some time, see if he can turn things around. Jack Doohan had a tough race, had a late battle with Gabriel Bortoleto. They had a collision. Doohan was given a 10-second time penalty for causing that collision. He ended up finishing last, while Bortoleto was classified in 18th. So, rookies, this is what's going to happen, right? Quick note on the race. I mean, not sure if it's going to be a 1-stop or 2-stop, but McLaren's race pace, like I said, looks fast. We'll see how that hangs on. I like to see what the Ferraris do. I am curious to see what Max does. And George Russell as well. Curious to see what happens with him, and what does Lando Norris do. Those are all things I'm looking at. If Oscar Piastri can nail down a win here, that's gonna catapult him in the driver's standings. That's gonna be really big for him. Really big. So, really excited for the race. Should be a good one. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll talk to you all Sunday or Monday. I think Adam and I are recording Sunday night, so I think he's flying out on Monday morning. So you'll either get that pod late Sunday night, or you'll get it early Monday morning. Anyways, thanks very much for watching and listening, folks.